Hello and a very warm welcome to you. Yes, you. Spare us a moment if you will. Put down your tablet, your phone, look up from your screen because it's your children we're talking about today. And if you're just scrolling, streaming, staring, what are they doing? Possibly the same, and quite possibly it's hurting them. Good to have you with us. You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. Growing data is suggesting that exposing young children to too much screen time can have negative effects on their development. So how much screen time is too much time?
In the age of digital technology, we are surrounded by screens. Kids adopt habits from their parents and peers, and picking up a phone or iPad is no exception. An Ofcom report on life on the small screens found YouTube was the most popular platform for children. A Canadian study tracked the progress of over 2,500 young children. Researchers found that children as young as 2 who spent more time with screens did worse in development. Lead researcher Dr. Sherry Madigan says excessive screen time can impinge on children's ability to develop optimally. But it's not all detrimental. The study also highlighted when children tune in with their parents, they can develop language and learning skills. As we discover more about technology's effect on our lives, is it time to rethink the quality of our screen time?
Very pleased to say that joining us from Sydney, Australia, we have Joanne Orlando, researcher in technology and learning at Western Sydney University. With me at the round table, Sally Payne, an occupational therapist, Leyla Preston, founder of Motherhood, Diaries, and Nisha, Dogra, professor of child psychiatry at Leicester University. Thanks for coming in. Listen, I know I said put down your tablets, put down your phones, but there is a picture of a cheese and tomato sandwich on the screen, and there is a reason why. It explains how much life has changed in this country. Half an hour ago, I was in the cafe next door, saw a young woman taking pictures of the sandwiches. Got chatting, said, why are you doing this? She said, because my friend's over there and she wants to know what sandwiches are available. She was 20 feet away. She was taking pictures of the sandwiches, sending them to her friend over there, who was then sending messages back saying, yes, I would like, in this case, the cheese and tomato sandwich. Life has changed and we can't put the genie back in the bottle. Who wants to start with that one? Motherhood Diary.
Motherhood
Come on.
Diary. Well, yeah, it has changed a lot since I grew up. I mean, I come from the end of Generation Y era, so I grew up with no real handheld devices or tablets or anything like that. So when I got to my teens and this internet came about, it kind of exploded and everything changed. We started to learn about the world, and you know, it was amazing, like this candy, you know, in a candy shop. And unfortunately, as it's getting, you know, as we're getting older and our kids are growing into this digital world now, they're being born into this digital world, that I think things have changed a lot, like especially social media wise.
So how do we stop it hurting them?
Well, for me, it's about having a balance of activities and occupations. I think the nature of play has changed since we were younger. There's more access to screens, and perhaps children are doing less of the physical play. They're playing with Lego, drawing, creating things that maybe we did in the past, which is, I wonder, affecting their development.
And the damage it can be done in terms of the mental health is unknown at the moment, but I noticed that you told our researcher that it can help with, it can hinder physical development as well, that children can't use tools such as scissors or cutlery or even do up buttons and so on.
Yes, as an occupational therapist, I'm interested in how children manage the everyday activities that keep them busy. So in order to do things like get dressed, manage buttons, use cutlery, use scissors, you need to have the fine motor skills, the gross motor skills to do that. And I think spending more time perhaps away from those physical activities means that children are missing opportunities to develop those motor skills that will be so important for the future.
Joanne, I'm going to come to you in Australia. You talk about technology and learning when it comes to younger children. And the point has been made that there are development opportunities missed. In other words, you can't become the proper child you should be because of this.
Well, it's all relative. children are growing up now in 2019, so they're not growing up in the 1950s. So the opportunities that they may be missing out on are also, there's new opportunities opening up for them from using screens. So there's definitely downsides to using a screen for them, but there are also benefits as well if it's used well.
I think that's especially true for children who perhaps don't always have the opportunities available to them because of learning difficulties or particular...
Or physical difficulties as well.
Yeah, and so I think one of the things we've got to do is take it into context. I think what we tend to do with anything to do with internet, social media, digital media is to jump from one extreme to the other. And actually what we probably know is that in reality, the answers are somewhere down the middle. So I think we need good quality research before we start getting too didactic about what it is we need to be doing. And I think we need to understand better what it is that children are getting from screen time, if it's balanced, and why is it that some feel that they need to resort to screen time, and is that because they're resorting to screen time because they haven't got what we would want them to have, which is normal social relationships and appropriate parental support and all of those kinds of factors. So I think we need to be very careful before we jump to great conclusions one way or the other and throw the baby out with the bathwater, because as Joanna says, there are such strong positives as well, but they're only positives if we manage the negatives. So we really need to think about the whole picture.
Yeah, I agree. I think when it starts to displace all the positive activities like going outside, kicking a ball, socialising with your friends and family bonding time, I think that's when the problem occurs, physical and mental.
But it does in a lot of cases, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, yeah. Well, for my kids, I've noticed it with my kids. You know, I've flitted back and forth. They're 6 and 8.
Yeah.
So I've flitted back and forth, I have to say, like from using it like a babysitter before when I was trying to deal with deadlines, and then avoiding it like the plague. And I've come out somewhere along the middle where I think it's okay to give them that responsibility as long as you're monitoring the time. And but not all screen time is bad. You know, that they've enhanced their development, their mental development through little apps, educational apps, things like that. As long as we stick to sort of a restricted time.
You talk about digital dementia.
Yes.
As well.
Well, yes, because I think kids and young people are growing up with this instant gratification needs. So no longer do they need to know how to solve a simple maths problem or remember mobile numbers, or, you know, they can get the whole series of a TV show they want to watch on Netflix. They don't need to wait. And I think that if you transfer it to normal life, you know, you have to foster relationships. You've got to foster, you know, work relationships, life relationships, love relationships, and that involves patience. And they're growing up to not have that because they're expecting everything in a click of a button, really.
I think probably doesn't apply just to relationships. I'm thinking about working for exams
Work
and all
as
of those
well,
kinds
exactly.
of things. Although I think exams is a whole different issue, but I think the whole thing about having to work for something, aiming for something, and not having that is really quite challenging. And I mean, and it's interesting, we talk about children, but we are really poor role models as adults.
We'll get into what parental responsibility is in just a moment. But Joanne, apologies first of all for putting you up next to a cheese and tomato sandwich at the beginning of the programme. It is a first for Roundtable, but do you recognise the phrase digital dementia?
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, the cheese sandwiches just isn't fair, is it?
Just a bit of fun.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Digital dementia, I think it's applicable for adults and children. We do tend to get into a particular flow state when we're on a screen, which means we tend to disregard everything else that's around us, and we are really wholly focused on what's happening in the screen. So I think that it can come across as an absent-mindedness or not connected to the environment. So I think that might be what a lot of people see in themselves and don't like in themselves when they're on a screen.
Okay, let's go around the table. We'll stay with you first of all, Joanne, and say, you're teaching people who are going to teach young children. What is the biggest and the best piece of advice that you would like to hand out to them?
Yeah, I think the term screen time, I think, is a big problem, because what it means is that we have to focus on the minutes or the hours that children are on a screen. And that says that everything they do on the screen is the same, that all content is equal. And we know, just going on screens ourselves, there's some great stuff online, but there's some really poor quality things online as well. So I think screen quality is a better idea to help us to guide children. You know, a child could be on their device for 30 minutes watching some kind of violent video, or they could be 30 minutes on their device, watching a craft video, making it themselves while watching someone instruct them online. And that's a good quality activity. So I think screen quality is something I'd like to get across.
Okay, that's a great idea. You have to wonder how difficult it is for parents with 2 or 3 children who are doing something else themselves to know exactly what is going on that screen. But what would your advice be?
My advice is to get a balance of activities, so making sure that time spent on the screen is balanced with time spent doing physical things, interacting with people, spending time with your family, having those conversations at the dinner table. All of those things are skills for life. And also then thinking about managing the daily routines and activities. When is a good time to have the screens out, and when should it be put to one side? And I think
the difficulty here surely is that if somebody immerses themselves for too long, then they become slightly uncommunicative. And you say, well, then we should all sit around the dinner table and talk. But if you then sit around the dinner table and talk, you get nowhere because this person has lost the skill. So how do you can't bring it back. You've got to prevent it from happening in the first place, haven't you?
Yes, but I think one of the things I agree entirely with Joanna and,
Sally.
that quality screen time is important, as is doing other activities. I think for me it's important to treat screen time as an activity. And so if your child had been away playing football, when they came back home, you'd ask them, what did you do? And you'd have a conversation about that. So I think it's really important to find out what it is your children are doing on screen, because I think one of the things is, particularly vulnerable children who spend a lot of time on screens are more at risk. If your activity, if that is your social activity, is being online and being on screen, then that's a real worry for me. And so I think parents need to, and I don't think we've got good guidance to give them at the moment, but I think parents need to be aware of what their children are doing on screen, talking to them about it and making sure that they understand that children don't see screen time as a replacement for social interaction.
But this is the difficult thing, isn't it? Because it's no longer virtual reality for some children. It is reality.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think we've got to think of ways of creating a move back into saying this is, and that's okay. And some virtual reality stuff is really good for kids. It engages them in things that they wouldn't have other opportunities to do. But it's about putting a context to it. And I think if it happens in the context of other problems for children, then it's going to be really difficult. So I think parents need to be much more alert. And, I think we make it sound as though it's a modern day problem, but parents have always had to be alert, but the dangers are just different now or more exaggerated than they have been previously.
Well, it's look right, look left, look right. When you cross the road, it's don't talk to strangers. It's all of those things, isn't it, that come from being a parent. Joanne, you wanted to say something, and then I'm going to ask you, Leyla, about your particular children, if you don't mind me asking about some of the things that they say to you about this. Joanne, you wanted to say something?
I do.
And do feel free at any time. Leave me out of it. You're the experts.
I think the environment that a child uses a screen is really important.
Yeah.
And often I'm finding from my own research that kids are getting mixed messages from their parents. So their parents are down on them, telling them not to use a screen very much, get off after the hour, that kind of idea. But there's also a very common parenting strategy of giving a child a screen to keep them quiet or to babysit them and using a screen as a pacifier. So for a child, which one is it then? Is it about managing screens and having healthy screen time behaviours, or is it using the screen to be quiet whenever mum or dad needs some space? So these mixed messages can be really confusing for kids and it isn't necessarily conducive to healthy screen time habits.
Yeah, we had somebody on another programme earlier this week who said, how can you ask children to tidy their bedrooms when they know that the adults are ruining the entire planet? And it's the same sort of thing, isn't it? What sort of example do you set?
Smart kids.
Yeah?
Yeah, very smart kids. I think going back to Joanna's point, if you have like a computer or a tablet or a laptop in a communal area, then you can monitor. That's what we do at home.
Okay, so not a particular one that they can take to their room, but
No,
just have
I
it there.
don't.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so the way that we do it, we do operate screen time on a length basis. We do a rule of 10s at home. And the reason why I do that is because I'm trying to teach them responsibility to control their own screen time. So they do a 10-minute job and I reward them with 10 minutes of screen time, which we monitor. And that gets, you know, if they want to do another 10-minute job, they can. They get another 10 minutes of screen time, and that's capped at 1 hour. And we use up all that screen time before 4 p.m. because they need a few hours to settle before bedtime. But they don't use that screen time when we're sitting around the dinner table, when their friends are over. I don't allow screen time when they have play dates and things like that. And when I asked them, I did ask them once, you know, how they felt about this. And they said, well, you know, it's okay. As long as we do our jobs, it's fine. You know, we get our screen time. So I think hopefully what will happen if I do that, because they're still so young, they're so giddy, and they don't really know about the social media world yet, I'm hoping that as they get older, they will automatically embed that control in their minds, and hopefully they don't, you know, overdo it.
Sally.
I absolutely agree. It's about that self-management skills that we want our young people to develop over time. And I think looking at a little bit ahead to the teenage years, I think as parents, as adults, we need to give them some guidance, but also that role modelling about when to put our phones down. And
What about relationships? How do they build relationships if the only world they know about it is one which you can't touch?
This is the thing.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and I would say that is a challenge. Children need the opportunity to practice those interactions, to pick up those non-verbal skills. But on the flip side of that, I work with lots of children and young people who've got additional needs, and actually screen time, playing virtual games, puts them on a level playing field with some of the other children.
Because if you can't run particularly well, you can in a...
Exactly. If you've got a child with a cerebral palsy or a movement difficulty, then actually they are competing with others, and that can be a positive thing. So it's all about balance for me.
But is it a life skill that we're not teaching them anyway, which is critical thinking? I do think we should be getting children to think about things in much more nuanced ways than we do. And I think the conversations we have are so extreme at times that they see the world in very polarised ways. And actually, it's about saying, you know what, this thing that you're doing, making friends online, it's got some positives, but actually think about the negatives as well. So we ought to be having conversations with them, which get them to think about the whole picture. So it's neither, you know, all good or all bad. So we should be modelling those conversations. And when we think about screen time, we should be asking them to think, well, what are the positives about having online friendships, and how's that different?
I don't know. What are the positives about having online friendships? Because I can't particularly see any.
Well, I think for some children it's a good way of starting relationships. I'm thinking particularly of children who might have autism, who kind of struggle with the social contact.
I get that, but for 99% of the population, as a child, what is the benefit of making an online friendship?
I think it's a good way, it can be a good way of starting that conversation. It's a good way of practicing your skills without necessarily being vulnerable. But on the other hand, that is not the only way to do it. And that's what I'm getting at, that actually what we should be getting children to think about is
the danger is it takes you down that rabbit hole and there's no way out.
Exactly, and how do you
control
But I think if you're having those conversations with them, you should be able to say to them, well, actually, what are the disadvantages of that also? Because the disadvantages of that are that you don't have that human interaction face to face, and there are advantages of that. But again, we need to be having conversations. Well, what are the advantages? Because I think again, the advantages of face to face contact are different for different people, and people take different things from different situations. So we need to be able to get people to understand that the world is diverse, and we pick and choose different things in different ways. But thinking about what it means to you, thinking about the positives for you and the potential negatives. And I think children are savvier than we think they are, by the way.
Can anybody of you cast your minds back, not to times that you knew of when you were growing up, but in history, to a period when children were open to such a major influence, which we had never seen before, which is what we're talking about now. Has it ever happened like this before?
I don't think so.
Not at this speed, for sure.
I don't think they're young enough to be able to control what they're feeling. It's like these dopamine levels are going off, you know, skyrocket. We have to remember that.
We're talking about highs and lows here, aren't we?
Yeah, like, you know, they're gaining real joy and feeling real stress when they lose and gain followers on Facebook, for example. You know, that's really, for me, that's very worrying, because I don't want them to have these high dopamine levels and then crash back down. That causes mental health problems. They're too young to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And going forward, you know, with the poor case with Molly Russell, unfortunately, what happened with her.
We should explain to those who don't know it. It's been suggested that she viewed self-harm images on Instagram and then took her own life. She
exactly,
was
and the parents weren't aware.
Yeah.
This is the thing, because when I watched the interview with the dad, and he said, well, she'd come off the phone just before, and she was herself again, and we were talking again. And
There
so
are so many ways that you can look at somebody who's going to harm themselves, and
Exactly,
unfortunately, one of the
and-
things is that they suddenly have perhaps come to a decision, and that releases them
that's the
a lot of
thing.
anxiety.
How do you know?
But yeah, and that's a different
But I
story.
think that's one thing
would
we haven't
suggest.
talked about, which is we talked about parental responsibility. We haven't talked about digital corporation responsibility. I can't understand whoever, you know, as a child psychiatrist, I'm sitting there thinking, whoever thought it was a good idea to allow those kind of things on their platforms and
agree.
taking responsibility for that. There is freedom of, you know, I have no problem with freedom of speech and all of that debate, but there is also taking responsibility that actually, if you're going to put something out, where's the measure for that? When you're, you know, putting out videos that tell young people how to self-harm, where is the responsibility for saying, actually, that can't be okay? We need to be able to monitor some of that because, you know, even not just young people, but adults are influenced by that.
Let's bring Joanne back into the conversation. Anything you've heard that you'd like to sort of reflect on?
Yeah, I think one of the big changes for children as well. So they're open to this global network now, and that's massive for them. It's a big change because when we were growing up, childhood, you knew the kids in your neighbourhood and the kids at school, but now you have a much wider network. But also another big change for children now is that normally they know more about technology than the adults do. So it's a really quite an extraordinary time in history that we're looking to children to show us how to use technology at home and how to do various things. So it kind of flips that power, you know, in a way for kids and adults.
But equally, they could be then looking at, let's say it was one of us, and they're showing us how to use this tool, and yet we're saying to them, don't use this tool because we think it's bad. I mean, they're not going to listen to that, are they? There's got to be another way of doing it.
That's right, because they see themselves as knowing heaps more than adults. So that message coming from adults is going to be a bit weaker than it would in other aspects of their life where we know a lot of things about it, you know, their health and diet and things like that.
So are we all agreed that it's all about being sensible parents?
Yes.
Which is what being a parent is supposed to be about anyway, but we don't live in an ideal world. And when you don't live in an ideal world, and not everybody is a sensible parent, is there anything you can do about this?
I think it's about information. I think it's about pointing out that the conversations that we've had today, that actually having a balance of activities, having some boundaries, thinking about it in advance is a good thing. Having
Conversations in schools about it. One of the interesting things is my 7-year-old nephew was talking to me about how they'd been talking about how there are problems on the internet, and I kind of went, what? And at school, they'd been having conversations in their classroom about when they were learning about this. And so I think it's about not to pretend it's not there. So we actually talk about it in a way that it makes it part of our everyday conversation.
You know what we haven't talked about is what do the screens do to your eyes and what do they do to your mind?
Yeah.
That's the thing, we don't know yet. I think the digital natives, as the RCPCH called it, the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health call it, are in their late 20s now. So how will we know what will happen to their eyes 30, 40, 50 years, you know, when they're older, whether they're our generation? We don't know that yet.
Well, my
It's not
mum and
there
dad
yet.
used to say, don't sit so close to the TV
Yeah.
because you're going to go boss-eyed or you're going to...
Well,
We
yeah,
still
but
say
the
that,
thing
and we
is,
don't know
I
that it's
think
true, do we?
That's what I'm saying. TV's been around for a while.
Exactly. But I think handheld devices are different because they're using it, you know, as they're walking across the street, before they go to school, when they're with their friends.
When they're buying cheese and tomato
when they're buying cheese and tomato
sandwiches.
sandwiches. I mean, you know, I think that is what the cause. It's this tiny little screen that they're using,
Yeah.
you know, in excess of what, 7-8 hours a day, or, you know,
I
however
saw,
many
I-
hours.
one of you said 2 hours a day, cap it at 2 hours a day.
Yeah.
Now, how much time do you think you spend online during the course of a day?
That's a really good question, isn't it? And I think the challenge for us is that, you know, technology is not going to go away. It's here. We need to work with it, embrace it, and think about how we model those behaviours as well as support our children.
We don't want to take them out of the rat race too, because inevitably when they get older they'll be working with a screen, and we want them to know, you know, I think the future of web coding, developing and blogging and things are the, you know, the industry future. So we don't want to take it out we want to give them the opportunity.
We have to set an example, but we often set the wrong example, I suppose.
Yeah, well, parents are the biggest role model when it comes to kids learning about what's acceptable technology use. So if you as a parent are walking around the home holding your phone all the time, or you're always on your laptop doing work emails at night, or always interrupting a conversation with your child to check your phone, then they're the kinds of habits and behaviours that your child is going to learn. They're
agree.
very powerful for kids.
Nisha, are we seeing more and more instances of people who are affected? Because you deal with children.
I think the difficulty is it's difficult to know whether children are going to screens because they've got mental health problems or whether it's the mental health use that's causing mental health problems. I think one of the things we know is that, and it may be that it's the digital age that's made so much people so much more aware of mental health issues, but certainly we're seeing rises in mental health problems. I think it's too difficult to say it's related to this or that because we know that child mental health problems are very multifactorial.
I think also, if I may, I think social media platforms should take more of a lead. They should be less reactive and more proactive, and that will help us parents be able to monitor our kids' use easier, because we don't want to see these kind of graphical images on the screen, or we don't want to see our kids looking at the screen and then having to take it away because they can't unsee that. So if we can have a nice little balance between the social media platforms and parents, I think maybe we can.
Be interesting to go
control.
through this conversation again in about 5 years. When
Yes.
you can tell us how
My kids are a bit
your
older.
newest one has been
Social
getting on
media,
with
yeah,
it.
exactly.
Fascinating. Joanne, thank you very, very much. Sally, thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Thank you very much
Thank you.
indeed. Nisha and Leyla, thank you too.
Thank you.
Look, 30 minutes without looking at, oh, there you go, the screen. See how much longer it can last. Thank you for taking part. Thank you for watching. And we hope to have your company for the next edition of Roundtable. Goodbye for now.